BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, and welcome to this special weekend episode of Black Box Online Radio. In this episode, I will be responding to the recent news that the Gilgo Beach serial killer suspect Rex Heuermann was also involved in the 1993 murder of Sandra Castilla, as well as the 2003 murder of Jessica Taylor. And I followed the Long Island serial killer mystery for a couple years, although I fully admit that I am not an expert on it. And back in 2021, I started making episodes about the stories here on Black Box Online Radio, and it was one where I didn't necessarily know where to begin. I watched the movie Lost Girls, and I did a direct response to that, and I also did standalone episodes for all of the victims at the time, including some of the unconfirmed victims, such as the Cherry's Jane Doe. But I did not have a standalone episode on the murder of Sandra Castilla, and that's what I'd like to talk to you guys about today. The Long Island serial killer was thought to have started operations in 1996 with the murder of Karen Vergata, who was previously known as the Fire Island Jane Doe, and then from 96 to 2003, there were a series of homicides in New York State where victims were mutilated, women specifically, were not only murdered, but also mutilated, dismembered. Their bodies were cut apart, put into different types of disposal sites and locations. Very, very vicious and horrific crimes. After the murder of Karen Vergata in 1996, there was the murder of Peaches Jane Doe and Baby Doe. Peaches Jane Doe is a name that was given to her only because she had a peach tattoo, and her daughter was an unidentified child who was about 3 years old at the time, and she is the only child that is widely discussed in a lot of these Long Island serial killer theories. Then there was the murder of Valerie Mack in 2000, and then the murder of Jessica Taylor in 2003. Both Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack had parts of their remains that were found rather close to the time when they were murdered, and then in about, maybe 12 years later after the murder of Valerie Mack, maybe even more like 9 or 10, there was the discovery of the serial killer graveyard on Long Island, and they found multiple remains that connected the cases to a lot of other stories, and there were all types of dots that were connected, and people realized that there was a serial killer who had been operating in a different way. Now, the authorities knew that there was a serial killer on the loose, but they began to connect the crimes in different ways. For example, the reason why Karen Vergata was first found in 1996 was because two people were out on the beach and they found human body parts. They found her legs. But because of the discoveries that were made in the early part of the second decade in the new millennium, they were able to find her skull and create a composite sketch, and she was known as the Fire Island Jane Doe. And in 2023, she was identified as Karen Vergata. But at the same time, the mutilations were very horrific, and a lot of the women went unidentified for a very long time. Peaches Jane Doe is still unidentified, and Valerie Mack was unidentified until 2018 when DNA revealed that the woman who had been murdered in 2000 was indeed Valerie Mack. And Jessica Taylor was identified rather early on because of a particular tattoo. So I got the news in 2023 that there was a breakthrough in the Long Island serial killer mystery, and that this man, Rex Heuermann, an architect who was 59 years old at the time, was arrested for the murders. And I was like, well, goodness, this is amazing news. The case has been solved. The Long Island serial killer has been identified. But wait, then it was all just pulled away, because at the time, he was only charged with the murders of 3 women, and they were Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amberlynn Costello, 3 victims of what are known as the Gilgo Four. They were murdered from 2007 and onward, and the Gilgo Four were not mutilated. And this has become the foundation of countless theories online, where people were saying that there were 2 killers operating. One was committing the crimes from 2003 and before, and another one was committing the crimes from 2007 and onward. And I've talked about it at great length here on Black Box Online Radio, but ultimately, we were all just left wondering, Well, has the Long Island serial killer actually been caught? Everything for a solid year that people were talking about in connection with Rex Heuermann, was all related to the Gilgo 4 murders. Now, no matter what, that would be good news if their murderer has truly been identified, successfully identified, and they caught the guy. But at the same time, what about all the other victims, like Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack and Karen Vergata and Sandra Castilla? Who was responsible for those crimes? Then, about 3 days ago, I got the news I was actually messaged on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box, giving a shout out to Batman66, who shared the news with me about how there was a breakthrough in the Long Island serial killer mystery, and Rex Heuermann has now been implicated in the murders of 2 women prior to 2007, and I, like many people, thought that they were going to say that Rex Heuermann was responsible for the murders of Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack. I think there is almost no conceivable alternative that the same person murdered Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack. Valerie Mack again was murdered in 2000, Jessica Taylor in 2003, and I was just like, well, that's what they're going to say. Then I read through an article from the New York Post, and it talked about how, indeed, Rex Heuermann has been implicated in the murder of Jessica Taylor, but he's going to be indicted also for the murder of Sandra Castilla from 1993. And I did not have a standalone episode on her, so that brings us to today's discussion. And I would like to go right to that New York Post article, because on Black Box Online Radio, I often share the stories with you guys in the way that I've learned about them. And I'm just going to read a quotation from the New York Post. And this article was written by Kevin Sheehan and Olivia Land, just citing the source. Gilgo Beach murder suspect Rex Heuermann kept meticulous notes on his kills, including reminders for future murders like hit harder and to get more sleep and to have playtime. Prosecutors revealed this Thursday as he was charged with 2 more slayings. Rex Heuermann, age 60, is accused of killing multiple women and leaving their remains scattered along Long Island's Ocean Parkway. He appeared in court on Thursday morning. This is from June of 2024, if you're listening to this in the future, and pleaded not guilty to second-degree murder charges for the 1993 death of Sandra Castilla and the 2003 killing of Jessica Taylor. He nodded along as Suffolk County prosecutors read aloud from an alleged planning document recovered from a computer in his Massapequa Park home that served as a blueprint for his twisted crimes and obsessions. So I think that one of the first points that we have to note is that not all serial killers are like this, where they just write out their blueprints and they have them saved at home. I think what this shows is that he wasn't expecting that he was going to get caught. He wasn't expecting that they were going to trace things back to him. And it's almost that type of arrogant ignorance when he just thought that it didn't apply to him. Rex Heuermann is a married father of 2 who was first arrested in 2023 for the murders of 4 young women who are known as the Gilgo 4, and he was linked to Sandra Castilla's murder as well as Jessica Taylor's through DNA from hairs found on their remains. And this is something else that gets talked about a little bit in some of the older Long Island serial killer theories. They're saying, yes, they have DNA, and then other people are saying, well, how reliable is it? And is that actually going to solve the case? Is it actually going to lead to a breakthrough? And it seems like now the rear view mirror is clearer than the windshield. Yes, DNA is going to be the key to this particular case, as well as perhaps solving the other homicides. Prosecutors went so far as to say that the case mostly relied on evidence that showed Rex Heuermann in the same location as burner phones used to contact some of the victims and taunt their families, as well as DNA found on several victims. But in March of this year, investigators discovered a damning trove of planning documents that Heuermann allegedly used to methodically blueprint his kills. And this goes into the category of everybody is innocent until proven guilty in the United States of America, right? Right? Well, I mean, I don't see much of an alternative. This guy seems extremely guilty. And, it's absolutely terrible what he did to these women. But, I mean, if anything, the killer is most likely going to be brought to justice. And I'm just hoping that they won't botch the trial or demonstrate that his rights were violated. something to that effect. And Sandra Castilla is a victim whom I haven't talked about much on Black Box Online Radio, so I'm going to go over to a different publication, Newsday.com, one that I haven't cited before on Black Box Online Radio, to provide an introduction to her story. Sandra Castilla's remains were found in North Sea in November 1993. Sandra Castilla was 28 years old when she was killed. She was a native of Trinidad and Tobago, but had lived in New York City before her death. Castilla's death had not been tied to the Gilgo Beach investigation until K-9 units searched the wooded North Sea property where her remains had been found in April. Police had previously said that Castilla's death may be linked to the killings of Colleen McNamee and Rita Tengretti, a narrative that continued through the 2014 arrest of John Bittrolf, who was eventually convicted in the other two murders. Police asked the public for help finding Sandra Castilla's family in 1993, saying that they needed more information to aid the investigation. Unlike the other victims in this case, Sandra Castilla was never described as a sex worker. Her relatives could not be reached for comment. The superseding indictment charging Rex Heuermann with the slayings of Taylor and Castilla is the first document formally linking the defendant with the death of Valerie Mack, although he has not been charged in her death. Now, I think it's just a matter of time before Rex Heuermann is going to be formally charged with the murder of Valerie Mack. As I said, the murders of Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack were very, very similar, mutilations and dismemberments. But with the murder of Sandra Castilla, she was not mutilated and dismembered in the exact same way. She was more or less found, and her body had been almost placed or posed, but she was not dismembered beyond recognition like these other victims. And I'm going to go over to another article from ABC News. This one was written by Aaron Katersky and Mark Crudelli, as well as Emily Shapiro. Just citing the source. Disturbing new details were revealed in the Gilgo Beach serial killings, as suspect Rex Heuermann was charged Thursday with 2 additional murders, bringing his total number of alleged killings to 6. Rex Heuermann was charged with the murders of Jessica Taylor from 2003 and the murder of Sandra Castilla from 1993, whose remains were found in North Sea, Long Island. In 1993, according to court documents, there were developments, but the developments significantly expanded, and the timeline in the Gilgo Beach case, with the first murder now in 1993. And again, I'm not extremely surprised about this because I know it's not the most reliable piece of information, but earlier this year I was watching an episode of Nancy Grace where they were talking about Rex Heuermann, and they were saying that this witness had come forward saying that she was with Karen Vergata and she was at Rex Heuermann's home, and that she was working a similar profession to Karen Vergata, I'll just leave it at that, and she left them, and she saw Rex Heuermann chasing after her, and somebody said, oh, they're just playing a game, they're just messing around, something to that effect. But she was pretty sure that she had witnessed Karen Vergata, who was a victim of the Long Island serial killer, with Rex Heuermann, who had been arrested and charged with the Gilgo Beach murders, the murders of the Gilgo Four. So I was just thinking, well, is it again just going to be a domino effect when once the evidence starts coming out, all of these crimes are going to be tied to Rex Heuermann? So, and that appears to be what's happening. Although, as you've heard very clearly, he has not been charged with the murders of Karen Vergata or Valerie Mack. And I would like to continue with a different source. This is from NPR, and it says that new charges suggest the serial killings began earlier than previously thought. The new murder charge against Rex Heuermann for the 1993 death of Sandra Castilla makes her the earliest known victim in the string of murders and suggests the architect allegedly began killing 30 years ago, earlier than the police previously thought. In November of 1993, the remains of Sandra Castilla, age 28, were found by hunters in a wooded area of Southampton, New York, according to a recent court filing. Jessica Taylor, another victim, disappeared in July of 2003. Her remains were discovered that year, and in 2011, in 2 separate locations, a dog walker found her body decapitated and her arms severed in the wooded area of Maynardville. Now, I think that's referring to the 2003 discovery. That's when they first found Jessica Taylor's dismembered remains, and then they found additional remains in 2011, as I said, with the discovery of the serial killer graveyard. But in both cases, male hairs were found on the remains of both Castilla and Taylor, and they were tested and found to be a likely DNA match to Rex Heuermann, the prosecutors said. The suspect allegedly kept a planning document to blueprint his killings. The recovery of data on hard drives and other devices revealed that Huerman was a significant collector of violent, bondage, and torture pornography dating back to 1993, according to court documents. The collection depicts pornographic images that are consistent with the crime scenes of both Sandra Castilla and Jessica Taylor, Suffolk County District Attorney Raymond Tierney said at a press briefing. Prosecutors also announced the most recent discovery of a suspect planning that it was methodically blueprinted his killings. The Microsoft Word document which Huerman allegedly tried to delete was recovered in March on a hard drive found in the architect's basement. It was one of more than 350 devices investigators retrieved during searches of his home. The document pictured in the court filing included checklists that appeared to involve steps before, during, and after to complete, according to the court documents. The tasks were littered with references to sexual and mutilation acts done to the victims. The steps included reminders to have a story set, to destroy pictures and other evidence. A body prep list has note to remove head and hands. Oh my goodness. Even as somebody who runs a true crime channel, this stuff is absolutely sickening, and it's very difficult to hear about. And I'm just sometimes you even have those moments when you're just simply sickened by the way that other people act toward their fellow human beings. And this is not extremely surprising, but it's sickening all the same. Now, going over to Michael Stallone's article on Fox 5 New York, and this says, Rex Huerman, the alleged Gilgo Beach serial killer, was charged with 2 more killings on Thursday morning, that of Sandra Castilla and Jessica Taylor. Rex Huerman was arrested last July in 2023 and pleaded not guilty to the deaths of the Gilgo Four. However, he is now a suspect in the murders of Jessica Taylor and Sandra Castilla. Huerman was indicted in the November 1993 death of Sandra Castilla, a Queens woman whose remains were found in the town of Southampton over 3 decades ago. According to the police, Castilla was found lying on her back with her arms outstretched over her head, and her uncovered legs were spread apart. She was also found with sharp force injuries to her face and body. And this is the article that I was thinking of when I was reading that Sandra Castilla was not mutilated as extensively as the other victims, going from Karen Vergata to Jessica Taylor over that 7-year stretch, if all of this material is correct. But what I think this shows about the suspect, Rex Huerman, is that he was methodical, but he also was thinking that he had gotten away with it. He was someone who created these plans, and he thought he had beat the system. He had beaten the system. But he was also, as I said, arrogant and ignorant. And, I mean, even somebody who has the most basic understanding of computers will know that the only way to completely remove something from a hard drive is to destroy the hard drive. You can delete files, but they're still going to be there, and they can be recovered. And people talk about this all the time. We grow up hearing about this. So it seems like he covered his tracks, but in a very sloppy and almost apathetic way. Someone who really thought that he wasn't going to be investigated. He thought he had put all of this effort into getting away with it and hiding and being secretive, so they weren't actually going to arrest him. That's just my take on the subject. And if you want to share any other pieces of information, I would like to read you your comments in the section down below. You can also hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And if you want to follow along with other stories here on Black Box Online Radio, I do a segment every Monday about the Zodiac Killer, one every Wednesday about Jack the Ripper, and one every Friday about D.B. Cooper. So with Sandra Castilla, it just seems like it's a very sad situation. It's an absolute tragedy. And as far as her interactions with Rex Huerman go, there is no evidence that she was working as a sex worker or anything of the sort, whereas the Long Island serial killer victims were mostly all working as sex workers, to the best of our knowledge. Some of them are still unidentified, but with Sandra Castilla, there could be other explanations. For example, Rex Huerman was known to frequent swingers parties and swingers clubs and to be involved in promiscuous relations even though he was married, and his wife was completely in on those, by the way, if all the stories that have been shared about them are true, that she knew about the swinging activities, but not about the serial killing activities. Then, I mean, there could have been numerous ways where Sandra Castilla could have met Rex Huerman back in 1993. And, again, I would just like to say rest in peace to the victims, rest in peace to Sandra Castilla. And this is just the latest investigative piece of evidence and discovery that is going to happen. And you guys can look at the time of this recording. I think it's going to be a very short amount of time that will pass before Rex Heuermann will be charged with the murders of Valerie Mack, absolutely, as well as the murder of Karen Vergata. And maybe one day we will see breakthroughs in other true crime cases. Perhaps Peach's Jane Doe will be identified, Cherry's Jane Doe will be identified, because for the longest time, Valerie Mack was simply just known as Jane Doe number 6, and as I said, she was identified in 2018, and I mean, the Fire Island Jane Doe, Karen Vergata, wasn't identified until 2023, and I have 2 episodes on Karen Vergata, one before she was identified, one after. I also have standalone episodes on the other victims that I've been talking about: Peaches, Cherries, Valerie Mack, Jessica Taylor, and I invite you to go through those episodes if you're curious about the Long Island serial killer mystery. But also, I want to point out that this should give us hope that there are going to be true crime breakthroughs all across the spectrum. The answers will come out. These people will not get away with it. And, for example, in 2018, the Golden State Killer was caught, identified, and went to trial, Joseph D'Angelo. That was one of the biggest discoveries, still possibly the biggest true crime discovery of the last 10 years. And if Rex Heuermann is indeed responsible for all of the Long Island serial killer crimes, then, and he is convicted, that could also be in the running for the biggest true crime discovery of recent times. And this should show that more and more cases are being solved, more and more answers are being brought forward, and it's no longer just in theory or speculation. And one day, I hope that there will be answers to the stories that I talk about here on Black Box Online Radio. Maybe they'll identify D.B. Cooper. Maybe they will identify the Zodiac Killer. That would be perhaps the biggest true crime discovery of anyone's lifetime who's currently alive. As far as Jack the Ripper goes, I don't think we'll ever truly know the truth, but I mean, it's history all the same. And right now, one more time, rest in peace to Sandra Castilla, rest in peace to the other victims, and I hope that these recent news breakthroughs will show that people will not forget her, people will remember her, and people will recognize that no matter what, she didn't deserve to die. I've received a lot of critical comments about murder victims here on Black Box Online Radio. Some people say, oh, well, they shouldn't be working that profession, even outside of the Long Island serial killer mystery, or that they insult the person's life choices. No matter what, these people did not deserve to be murdered, and Sandra Castilla is one of them. Rest in peace to her, and condolences out to her family wherever they may be. And that's all for me now. Until next time.